Okay, so today we're looking at an interview with Dr. Sheila Nazarian on Chicks on the Right. It covers her escape from Iran as a child and her thoughts on American culture and politics.
Right, and I think the first thing we have to talk about is the structure, because the transition from this really high-stakes personal trauma to cultural commentary, it kind of undermines the gravity of her authority.
Exact. That's the core issue, isn't it? The piece opens with this gripping, visceral story of escaping Iran.
Oh, it's incredible.
You're right there with her, hiding under burlap sacks in a truck, the pain from a metal rod in her ribs, digging a hole in the desert to go to the bathroom.
And being shot at. Don't forget, being shot at by border police.
Right, being shot at. It establishes so much credibility, so much emotional weight.
It really does. You are completely in that truck with her. But then, it's like almost immediately after this life or death story, the narrative just pivots.
It just drops.
It shifts so abruptly to, complaints about animated movies where a snake is the hero, or these generalizations about white liberal women being insane.
And that right there, that's the weakness. You're juxtaposing, literally dodging bullets to breathe free with these much lower stakes culture war complaints.
You get this kind of whiplash.
Totally. The listener loses that emotional thread. You go from seeing her as this incredible survivor of tyranny to, well, just another pundit. The gravity just vanishes because the stakes go from survival to annoyance with no ramp.
So is the risk that the audience might feel like that amazing opening story was just bait because the connection isn't really made for them?
That is the precise risk. So the suggestion here is to build a much stronger thematic bridge. Connect the trauma of the past with the warnings for the present. You have to keep the stakes elevated.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you do that? How do you bridge being shot at by police with, I don't like this new cartoon?
Well, let's get concrete. Instead of jumping from the border police story to just saying people are dumber and lazier, she needs to explicitly link the mechanism of control, what they did in Iran versus what she sees here.
So don't just say the movie is bad, but analyze the propaganda technique behind it.
Precisely. When she's talking about the snake being the hero, it shouldn't just be movies are bad now. It should be framed as a direct parallel. Something like, in Iran, the first thing the regime did was use cartoons to make us sympathize with our oppressor. I see that exact same psychological conditioning when a villain is reframed as a hero.
Oh, that's fascinating. That turns a complaint into a warning. It makes the movie a symptom of a disease she's already survived.
It keeps the stakes geopolitical.
Right. What about the Michael Jackson bootleg tapes? That was such a great little anecdote.
It was, but it's totally underutilized right now. It's just a memory. So the suggestion is to use that anecdote to contrast the American culture of then, this beacon of freedom, with her view of American culture now.
So not just a list of complaints.
Now, contrast the America that she ran to with the America she sees now. That's a powerful narrative. It's the America I risked my life for is disappearing, not just things are getting worse.
I like that. That really tightens the whole arc. It keeps her survivor story front and center.
Exactly. And, building on that, we really need to talk about the rhetoric itself, the rhetorical precision, because once we get into the commentary, the language gets a little messy.
It does. I think the issue is the reliance on hyperbole, on labeling. It really limits who's going to be persuaded by the argument.
Yes. The speaker and the host, they use words like insane, possessed, madness, dumber and lazier, and they're aimed at, white liberal women or Candace Owens.
And while those words are emotionally charged, do they really convey authority? I'm not so sure.
That's the weakness. It plays great if you already agree. But for anyone else, it just shuts down her intellectual authority. It makes her sound like she's having an emotional reaction, not giving the objective analysis that her background implied.
It feels more like a tweet than expert analysis.
Right. So the suggestion is to replace these broad labels with specific behavioral analysis. Deconstruct the ideology.
Be more surgical.
Exactly. Be surgical. Take her colleague, the plastic surgeon. Instead of just calling her insane for her views on Iran, describe the contradiction. Say something like, it's a paradoxical worldview. She champions women's rights here, but defends a regime that mandates rape before execution.
That's so much more powerful. You're not attacking the person, you're exposing the flawed logic. The insanity becomes self-evident.
It does. And with Candace Owens calling her possessed or talking about a Jezebel situation, That's not an argument.
No, it's just name-calling.
It is. The better way is to dissect the specific flaw in Owens's argument about Israel or history. Say, she is omitting this key historical fact, which I witnessed firsthand. That restores her authority as a primary source.
I see. And what about that dumber and lazier comment about the general population?
That one's dangerous. You risk alienating everyone. So instead of these vague causes like hormones in the meat, she should focus on what she knows. She mentioned Columbia University. Talk about that. The curriculum is shifted from critical thinking to ideology. That's an observation, not an insult.
Okay, that makes sense. It's moving from name-calling to a cultural diagnosis. But that brings me to my next question, which is, are the bigger claims she makes supported with enough evidence?
Good question. The connection between, say, domestic U.S. policy and the Iranian regime's strategy, it needs some stronger evidentiary glue.
I noticed that too. I mean, she says intersectionality was invented in Iran and that the college protests used the same formula as the Iranian Revolution. That is a massive historical claim.
It's huge. And the weakness is that the evidence she gives is, well, it's largely anecdotal. She mentions REI tents that cost $500, or the Biden campaign using the word joy.
Right, the joy thing. Doesn't that risk sounding a little bit like a conspiracy theory? Like you're connecting dots that aren't really there?
That is exactly the issue. It feels circumstantial. The suggestion is to bolster this analysis with, concrete historical data, not just surface-level coincidences.
So how do you fix the joy argument? Because I kind of see what she's getting at, that authoritarians use nice language, but it doesn't quite land.
You move from the word to the tactic. Don't just say, they use joy, Biden used joy, so it's the same.
Right.
Instead, say something like, in 1979, the Ayatollah weaponized vague positive language to disarm his critics. I see that same linguistic drift happening now.
Ah, so you're connecting the method, not just the vocabulary. It's subtle, but it makes the argument so much more robust.
Exactly. What about the intersectionality claim? That point about the Communist Party in Iran joining with the Islamists was fascinating, but it was way too brief.
It was. So she needs to explain how that mirrors what's happening at Columbia.
Yes. Be explicit. Say, just as the Marxists in 1979 thought they could use the Islamists to overthrow the Shah and then take over, we see leftist groups in the U.S. allying with fundamentalist groups, ignoring that their end goals are incompatible. That is a historical lesson.
Not just a soundbite that sounds like hyperbole.
And the tents? The $500 REI tents?
Yeah, that felt a little weak. The rhetorical question, who's paying for that?
It is weak. It implies a conspiracy without any proof. The suggestion is to either substantiate the claim, talk about funding flows if she knows them, or pivot to the organization of the protests, how people are bussed in. That's a stronger point than the retail price of their camping gear.
That makes sense. It shifts from, look at these rich kids, to look at this funded operation. Okay. Can we pivot to the format itself? We have the guests, but we also have the interviewers.
Yes. Let's talk about the interviewer dynamic. The critique here is that the conversation lacks the friction needed to draw out the guest's best side.
I felt that the whole time. The hosts are basically an echo chamber. It's all agreed, so true, it's madness.
And the weakness there is that they miss all these opportunities to probe her ideas. By just agreeing with everything, they're actually doing her a disservice. Her arguments are left untested, so they seem thinner than they probably are.
Like when she says, arm them, meaning the Iranian protesters, or drop guns. The hosts just accept it.
They just accept it. But is that a fully formed idea? It sounds more like an action movie plot point. The suggestion for the interviewers is to adopt a kind of constructively skeptical persona. That allows the guest to really show how robust her ideas are.
So if I'm the host, instead of agreed, what do I ask?
Okay, when she says arm the protesters, a better question is, that's a bold solution, but how do we actually do that without triggering a war, especially with the lack of infrastructure you mentioned? How do you get weapons into a lockdown country?
That is a great question, because if she has an answer, she looks like a brilliant strategist, and if she doesn't, we move on. But by not asking, she just sounds like she's, throwing ideas out there.
Exact. It forces her to defend the logistic. Or, another example, she praises Marco Rubio as morally clear. The hosts just say, he is.
Yeah, it turns into a pep rally.
Right. So the better move is to ask for specifics. You mentioned he's morally clear. Can you give us a concrete example of a policy he's championed that would actually solve the Iran issue? Move from character praise to policy analysis.
And I guess that applies to the brain drain comment too?
Yes, she mentions the brain drain from Iran. A great follow-up would be to contrast that with the dumbing down she sees in the U.S. Ask her, is the mechanism the same or is it different? That creates a much deeper dialogue than just a shared complaint session.
It really seems like all the ingredients are there, you know? A compelling person, high stakes, strong opinions. It just needs that structural and rhetorical tightening to really land.
That's the heart of it. The potential is immense because her experience is so powerful. We just need to shape the argument so the listener is guided through the logic, not just hit with the emotion.
Do you think there's a risk the guest might be resistant to that? Sometimes passion just overrides structure.
It can, but our goal here is always impact. And a passionate argument that is structured logically is always more persuasive than one that just relies on labels and loose association.
That's a fair point. By tightening the so what of her cultural complaints, you're actually honoring the trauma of that opening story more.
Precisely. You honor the survival story by making sure the lessons drawn from it are rigorous and unassailable.
So, to wrap things up, what are the main takeaways here?
Okay, to recap the main feedback. First, structure the narrative to maintain the high stakes you established in the opening. Don't let that tension drop from escaping border police to complaining about cartoons without a really strong thematic bridge.
Right. And second, use precise analysis, not name-calling. Insane and possessed might feel good to say, but they erode authority. Describe the contradictory behavior instead of just labeling the person.
Third, substantiate those big historical parallels with deeper evidence. Move from coincidences like the word joy toward explaining historical methodology. And finally, the interviewers need to ask more probing questions. Accept the premise, sure, but challenge the logistics. It fleshes out the solutions.
It's really about taking this incredibly powerful raw material and refining it into an argument that's undeniable.
We invite the listener to refine the flow and the rhetorical approach using these suggestions. Implement those bridges, sharpen the definition, maybe invite a little more friction into the dialogue. And once that's done, please submit the next version for more feedback. We would love to see how this powerful story evolves into an even more powerful warning.
Absolutely. I would love to see where this goes.
That wraps up our critique for today. Keep working on the craft.